Hello, everyone. Welcome to 1.5 Degrees, the podcast where together we explore the science, solutions, and stories involved in the fight against climate change and environmental issues. I'm your host, Heidi Pan, speaking with the professionals behind the latest research, policies, culture, and innovations shaping our response to global environmental challenges. For today's episode, we are incredibly fortunate to be joined by the founder of EcoSpectrum and an all-around amazing climate advocate, Dana Ahmed. Dana is involved in empowering youth who are most affected by the lack of urgency in the climate and ocean crisis, inclusivity of youth, students and youth on the spectrum of autism and climate action, sustainability, and ocean preservation matters. Dana is also a member of IRENA's Youth Forum and was a youth delegate and council member in the 9th and 10th IRENA Assembly sessions in 2020. She is also Egypt's representative in the UN SDG 7 constituency group and the secretary and Egypt's representative at the Sustainable Ocean Alliance Youth Policy Advisory Council. Also the executive director and co-founder of MENAECO, the first ocean-based organization in the Middle Eastern and North African region, and an outreach officer at the MENA Youth Network. Dana, thank you so much for being here today. It's truly an honor.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm super excited to join.
I'm also quite excited for this conversation. Okay, so to start, could you tell me a little bit more about your mission with EcoSpectrum and how you came to start it?
Yeah, EcoSpectrum has been quite a journey. It's something that I've always wanted to work on, but never actually kind of found a way, because having a platform that kind of combines both the climate movement and youth on the spectrum of autism is something that's quite new. We have activists like Greta Thunberg, who's on the autism spectrum, but it hasn't been spotlighted and there hasn't been much research about it, almost at all. I live and I was born and raised in the UAE, the country that has the second highest rate of autism in the world. So kind of hearing those stories and kind of like watching the Special Olympics and having friends on the autism spectrum has always been kind of part of my life. Even though I'm not personally on the autism spectrum, I am in a community that is surrounded by people who are neurodivergent or on the spectrum. So I've always known about these stories, even though I might not understand it to the fullest capacity. But it's always been something that's on my mind. And obviously having joined the climate movement as an Egyptian youth advocate, Egypt is one of the countries that struggles the most with the climate crisis. We're the country that has almost the highest level of water scarcity. The Red Sea is very impacted by the climate crisis, the rising temperatures. The Nile is one of the most polluted Niles in the world, and that is our main source of water. There are multiple impacts that the Egyptian community deals with, and specifically youth. So I kind of just had to merge both points and find a way to make something that is accessible to everyone. And particularly that community that, although I'm not part of them, I'm kind of in, I'm learning about them every day. And I had to take that kind of initiative to do my own research and find my primary resources, go to these schools and speak to those teachers and go to psychiatrists and hospitals and special hospitals and learn about the curriculum. So I had to do all of that myself to try and be fully equipped to start the EcoSpectrum.
Yeah, no, you're definitely really paving the way, I think, and you definitely, it really is, I think, an issue that is so underrepresented, and it's really like important to be able to work on these things and improve accessibility. So I mean, thank you so much for the work that you do in this aspect. So in addition to being the founder of EcoSpectrum, you also co-founded MENAECO. Am I pronouncing it like MENAECO?
MENAECO.
Okay. Yeah, and so that is also a first of its kind. What are you thinking are the biggest underrepresented issues in the Middle East and North African region right now? And what do you think is something that everyone should be more conscious of?
Definitely the oceans. The oceans are what keeps us alive. We get 70% of our oxygen from the oceans, and it is something that is so underfunded and undervalued. And I'm not talking about ocean love. We all love the ocean. I don't think anyone has specific hate for the ocean. I don't think that, but no one actually knows the true value of it. And that is specifically kind of relevant in the Middle East. Not only we as a community are underrepresented, but we also don't value and don't understand the extent of the harms that are happening to the ocean. That is because of the lack of education. And that is why we need climate education. That is also something that I hope to work towards with EcoSpectrum, is that it's not just exclusive to youth on the spectrum, it's also inclusive of everyone who is willing to learn about the climate crisis. I mean, even in the UAE, when I visited Al Jalila Hospital, and I spoke to Dr. Abu Hakim, who is also the former president of the Arab autistic community in Dubai. One of the points he raised is that EcoSpectrum can, because of how accessible and how comprehensible the information on EcoSpectrum can be, it also can be used to educate adults, because that information really is lacking. So I think the MENA region specifically struggles a lot with the ocean, and it doesn't only sustain life in general, it is particularly of such importance in the MENA region because of how big of an issue water scarcity is that stems from the ocean. And we are also a region that the Middle Eastern North African region is also a region that struggles a lot with the rising temperatures. And that not only affects our oceans, but affects our agriculture. And for example, Egypt, 70% of our food comes from our agriculture, and also 70% of our income comes from agriculture. Not even from tourism, for example, which is also a big kind of economic benefit to Egypt. The pyramids and different areas in Egypt also generate a lot of financial income, but it's agriculture that is kind of our main point. And because of the rising temperatures and because of the flooding, for example, that happens in certain areas like Alexandria that is on the shore, there's just a huge imbalance. And right now we're struggling with one of the biggest economic crises that Egypt has ever been through. And there is a lack of sufficient food resources and water resources. And even our president has come out and said that by 2025, there is not going to be enough water to feed the growing population of Egyptian people. And this all stems back to the ocean. The root of the issue is the ocean. And one of also the biggest main issues that are happening that it also concerns the MENA region is deep seabed mining, that not many people in the MENA region are talking about. We see and hear, for example, Latin America and the Americas and different regions around the world that are talking and speaking up about deep seabed, the deep seabed mining crisis, but not many people in the region know how it affects us. So it's just the lack of education, and specifically the lack of ocean education is one that is not only underrepresented, but is also underfinanced. So yeah, that is why we started MENAECO.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, really, yeah, you mentioned how we all love our oceans, but it really is, there's such a gap in terms of like, how do we know how to protect these? And it's really great that you're equipping people with the resources to be able to get involved in this work. So kind of in that line, what do you think still is needed for empowerment, inclusivity, and representation in ocean climate work? And what have you found to be the best approaches for supporting empowerment, inclusivity, and representation?
There's so much that is needed. There's so much that is needed to be done, but that is not to say that we shouldn't be hopeful. I think that in this sphere right now, the climate movement, and especially in an age where we rely so much on our social media, there's so much going on with misinformation, misrepresentation, having people represent certain communities that they don't know much about or haven't really understood or tried to understand their struggles. There is an issue with performative activism. And that is something that us as a generation is trying to tackle. Because it's great that people are going out of their ways to try and attend conferences and speak out and go and kind of use their voice and use their platforms to speak about such an issue. But sometimes that kind of representation is just false and it's just wrong. And that is not to say that even us, I consider myself someone that is very privileged in my opportunities and in my knowledge. I know that the knowledge that I'm equipped with, not many people have access to. And that is a huge issue that we're trying to resolve as a generation again, not just me. But also having that in mind, I have a huge responsibility to represent them accurately and to not speak on anyone's behalf, speak for them, raise awareness, get people to know about them, about their stories, put faces to the stories, but not speak for, like, not kind of take their identities and use it as mine. And that is something that I see happening almost every day. And it's something that is very disheartening to see. And it even puts people like me, who is someone that is very hopeful about the climate, about resolving the climate crisis, because I believe that we have the solutions. But it puts me at a place where I feel that kind of unhopeful, because they're taking opportunities from people that do deserve the stage and do deserve the chance to speak up again, to speak up about their issues and their struggles. So I think this is something that we need to work on, and it's something that collectively we can resolve and we can tackle, but we need to speak up about it more, because I think it's something that no one talks about. Because again, when you say, oh, performative activism, people want to put names in people's speeches or in people's stories, and that's something that we're not trying to do, or at least is not the right thing to do. But it's something that needs to be spoken up about. People need to be aware of it. People need to double check their information, go to the accurate resources. Not everything is on social media. Not everything on social media is right, and not everything on social media is kind of telling you the whole story. Sometimes they take bits and pieces, and then they apply it to different things that don't even interlink or relate. So you need to look for resources that are actually verifiable, and you need to read, and you need to actually understand and speak to people. You not just go and help one community and just end it at a specific time frame. Keep in touch and keep doing the work continuously. Don't stop. So yeah, I think that's something that is going to create more inclusivity, more representation, more true representation, and just a better solution for the climate crisis that we can resolve.
Yeah, no, you just said so many important things just now. Really, like, it's so refreshing to hear. Unfortunately, that it's refreshing. But it's like, I'm really glad that you're speaking about issues like performative activism. Like, I've seen that everywhere nowadays. Like, just like it is indeed very disheartening. And so I guess, like, to go along with that, what is some advice do you have for those who are like disillusioned by all of the performative activism and like all of the, like, right now climate doomerism and ocean doomerism, like, that is kind of on the rise, but what do you have to say for those like in order to, like, keep up our hopes and spirits?
Something that I'm gonna use the advice of another climate activist that I really look up to. Her name is Aisha Sadiqa, and I've had the pleasure of meeting her at COP27, and she said something that kind of stuck with me, which is that one of the main pillars that cause climate doomism and cause a lot of eco-anxiety is that we are handed this kind of responsibility by world leaders and executives that we can resolve the entire issue, that we can save the entire world. And, the issue of the climate crisis and the issue of climate change is something that even people who have been on the works and the people who are on policy, who can literally make decisions by a sign of a pen, don't understand the full capacity of. And we're expected at ages of 17, 18, 19, 20, 25, and maybe younger, to understand and to take charge and control of it all. And that is the main issue, is that that responsibility shouldn't even be handed to us in the first place. We should not be here. we should not
we should be going to school and focusing on like whatever.
Exactly. I shouldn't be, letting go of some of my exams to try and go to a climate conference, to try and speak to my government and speak to people in charge. So that's not something that is normal, and it's normalized, and it shouldn't be, because once it's normalized, we're taken less seriously, as a generation, really. So one of the best advice I've heard is that everyone has a corner of people that they have influence on, whether that is their families, their neighbors, their friends, their cats, since you're talking about cats. No, I'm joking. But everyone has a corner of people that they have influence on. And once they focus on that corner of people and they educate that corner of people, they speak out to the corner of people that they have influence on, they have conversations, they learn, relearn, unlearn, and remember histories and the lives of the communities that we have lost to the climate crisis, but also we are on the verge of losing, and that are also again, the stakes are really, really high. So having those conversations and focusing on that corner of people together, if we all focus on our small corners, then eventually climate education and the climate crisis is going to be something that is commonly spoken about and something that is resolved, because in each corner you can find a leader, in each corner you can find a communicator, in each corner you can find a team worker who is able to reach out and who is able to have that influence, who has those connections. And I think that puts a lot less pressure on us, and that's the way it should be. Yeah, that is something that I take quite close to my heart, and something that I always try to remember, is that I don't have to save the world. I don't have the resources and I don't have the capacity. I'm one person. But always trying to learn from each other and grow and keep remembering. And also that leader in your corner of people, try to speak to your corner of people about your own stories, your own experience. We all have a story with nature, with climate, with the ocean. We all have stories. I mean, my story kind of always goes back to my granddad, who I unfortunately lost on January 3rd of this year, earlier this year.
Oh, I'm sorry for your loss.
And he was my biggest inspiration, and he is the reason why I'm in this movement. And this is something that is very personal to me. And once I go and speak about him in those conferences, people listen. Because yes, we get so overwhelmed by the stats and the science and the statistics and the data. But again, just putting faces to those stories is really, really important. So, and I hate to be cliche and cheesy, but storytelling is so important, as
really
well
is,
as talking about the science. And getting, again, as I said, getting those resources firsthand, which all stems from experience, all stems from your experience and your knowledge and your community and your corner. So yeah, that's the advice I'll give, I think.
Yeah, no, that's really, really great advice. Like, I personally definitely struggle with eco-anxiety, and sometimes, like, when you're spending so much time in this field, it is really so easy to get caught up with feeling overwhelmed, and to know that it's like, it's one step at a time, and that everyone can make a difference, no matter how small, because really it can be so many things. That's really great advice. Yeah, so you kind of mentioned this before, but you often work with like adults and people from diverse backgrounds, and in that there are sometimes kind of barriers in communication. What is something that you've learned in the process of like bridging intergenerational and intersectional gaps, and how did you kind of come to learn that?
So I think it stems from how I was born and raised in the UAE. The UAE is quite literally a melting pot of diversity. diverse in nationalities, diverse in abilities and capabilities, and just complete diversity. So I grew up with people with all kind of different nationalities and all different abilities, and I'm so grateful and privileged to have done so. I think I'm really grateful for where I grew up, because I learned so much from that. But also at the same time, I grew up very in a very close knit family, and I'm very close to my grandparents. And I was able to, and although I was born and raised in Abu Dhabi, but I'm Egyptian, and now I study in Glasgow, so I'm in 3 different continents.
Yeah.
Here. But one thing that I learned from that, and I took away from that, despite how hectic sometimes it gets and underwhelming it gets, is that you always have to link back to your roots. You always have to go back to your roots. You always have to go back to family. You always have to go back to that reason, that push that made this entire tree bloom, you know? And one thing that I also learned from my granddad was the history in Egypt, which is something, it's so basic, but I, as someone who grew up in the UAE and never lived in Egypt, I always felt like an outcast, because I'm not Emirati, but I also know even my cousins don't actually consider me fully Egyptian, because I speak fluent Arabic, but maybe sometimes I mess up, or my accent is kind of not the best. But my granddad never made me feel like an outcast. And one thing he always taught me was that the blood that runs in your veins, the blood that runs right under your skin, your cells, is the same blood that runs through your aunts back in Zifta al-Gharbiyya, where my granddad's hometown is, and they are one of the most impacted by the agricultural limits because of climate change. And so the same blood that runs through me is the same blood that runs through them, and it's the same blood that runs through my granddad. So I always carry them wherever I go. Sometimes I feel like the black sheep, or sometimes I feel like I shouldn't be in a space because someone else deserves my space. I'm too privileged, or I'm too lucky. But I remember that their blood still runs through me. And again, this is so cliche, but it's something that genuinely I grew up knowing, is that their blood runs through me. So I represent generations of people that struggle and have grown up near oceans, near forests, near the Nile, near agricultural lands, near trees, near nature. Even my granddad's name is to do with nature. His name is Asfour, which means a bird.
Oh my God, that's beautiful.
So yeah, it's bird in Arabic. So he's someone that loved nature and loved, yeah, he loved nature with all his heart. So I carry that through me. I carry his blood through me. I carry his passion through me, and I'm kind of carrying his mission through me as well, through what I'm doing now. And that is kind of the link that I had to learn to make with being in those high-level panels and high-level conferences, is that I don't only carry my generation, I carry generations that were raised by my granddad and before, and also my entire family. And then I'm also merged with the communities that I grew up amongst in the UAE, that are also I consider a lot of them my family as well. It's my home. So I merge those together, and then I try to represent and speak up about it as much as I can.
Yeah, no, you say that advice can sometimes be perceived as like cliche, but I mean, you could say that it's cliche for a really good reason, because that's really beautiful advice. I personally struggle with imposter syndrome, and I also, like, my parents they immigrated from China, and I definitely sometimes feel that disconnect from my cultural background a lot. So that really hit home, and that's really great advice. So you do represent Egypt at IRENA and other organizations. What does representing Egypt mean for you, and what does that entail exactly?
It's something that I've always struggled with, and I think I'll always struggle with, is when someone asks me where is home, I don't actually know what to say. And I haven't figured that out yet. But I think, and especially after my granddad's passing, that I'm still going through the grieving now because it's very recent. It's something that I keep thinking about constantly. It's whether I'm doing the right thing representing Egypt, whether I am Egyptian. But again, it's just always going back to that story about my blood that my granddad always raised. And I mean, even when I would, not sometimes not speak Arabic in a family gathering, he would look at me and he would give me kind of a death stare. so I kind of, so it's just always going back to the roots, to your blood, to your veins. And also remembering that I spent a lot of my childhood in Egypt, even though I studied in school in the UAE.
Mm-hmm.
In summers, I would always come here and I would always go to Zifta and I would always be with my granddad and I would always be my family. And I'm kind of very different to my cousins and my brother because they wouldn't spend as much time with my grandparents as much as I did. Because, for example, my brother is someone who's very outgoing. So when he would come to Egypt from the UAE, he would instantly just go out. And I would be the complete opposite. I would rather sit at home and stay with my grandparents. So it's something that it's just remembering my childhood and my memories and where I feel closest to. And don't get me wrong, home, I still have a home in Abu Dhabi and I still have a home in the UAE, and that will always be part of me. But I think because I grew up in such a close-knit family and because I saw like firsthand my family in Zifta, and I've seen the land that they couldn't grow crops in. I've seen the land that fed me, that fed my family, that fed my granddad as a child. So I can't not represent Egypt. I can't feel as much as I feel like an outcast sometimes, as much as I always, especially after his passing, I've never felt so close to Egypt, and I can't imagine being or representing anything or anyone else.
Yeah, I think that's what matters most, what you feel closest to, and in terms of like representation, it's that's really beautiful. So in your career in climate work, are there any, like, in addition to your granddad, like, what are some more memorable or favorite moments or aspects of the work that you do now, that you can think of?
Just meeting my friends, which is, it's not work related per se, but I think it's just being reminded that there are people who are just as passionate as you are in the movement. As much as there is misinformation and performative activism, as I've mentioned, as much as there are so many other people who are genuine and loving and passionate and actually have such a meaningful voice and meaningful stories to tell, and just always being reminded that they're there is so important because it gives me hope. One of my closest friends in the movement and even outside the movement is my friend Ella Gökşiden, and she's the representative of Turkey in Sustainable Ocean Alliance, and that's how we got to know each other. But her stories and when she talks to me about her hometown in Afsha that struggles with sea mucilage, and her the beautiful oceans that she grew up surrounded by are at an existential threat. And the farmers that are in her village are struggling. And our stories are so interlinked because that is exactly what's happening in my hometown, back in my granddad's hometown in Zifta, is that the farmers are struggling, the oceans are dying, and we are just lucky that the Red Sea which the Sinai Peninsula surrounds is so strong and is so durable. But that's not to say that climate change doesn't impact it. It will never impact it, because it does. But I just sharing those stories, learning about people just from all over the world, going to these spaces, as much as the anxiety and frustration that comes with being in spaces like COP, as much as it's so heartwarming to know that people like me and people like you exist, and they're fighting for the exact same cause, for the exact same purpose.
Yeah, no, I also tend to turn to my community for kind of like that hope and that sense of like we're all in this together. That's kind of cliche, but we're really all in this together. Yeah, no, that's really great to keep in mind. I guess to like close off, if you could turn back time, butterfly effects aside, what are some pieces of advice that you would give to the version of you who is just starting out in this work, and in turn, what advice would you give to someone or young people that are interested in getting involved?
So the advice that I would give to myself, and this is so different, and again, this is coming from the grieving process that I'm still going through, is that spend more time with him, spend more time with Dad, talk to him more. I spoke to him as much as I could, and I know that if I were to say more, then that would mean just not going back to the UAE and studying. I know that I did the most out of the memories. I took the most out of him for the time that I had with him. But it's just I'm just being selfish. I wish that I had more time to spend with him, and I wish we spoke more about the things that we used to speak about. I wish that I wish my younger self would go on one more trip to Zifta, or one more trip with my granddad. Just things like that. That's the advice I'd give to my younger self, is just really appreciate him, because he was and is a beautiful person who will always be part of my story. It will be part of my blood. The things that the advice are kind of the things that I would tell to maybe new activists, or activists that are still kind of confused, or activists that live in diasporic communities, grew up in a different place, is from a different place, studies in a different place, and it's just all around the world, is to remember that there is a community there is support, there are resources, there are solutions. You just have to go and look for them. And if there isn't a community, go and create one. Don't be kind of afraid or shy away from those conferences and the really big words and the IPCC reports and the data and statistics that can be very, very scary. I know I'm a law student.
Yeah.
But most about climate change law and international law, we know how it feels, and especially when there's no one to hold these people accountable. But just remember that there is support, and you will find people who have the same passion. Don't be disheartened by the performative activists that you see all over headlining several different articles. That's advice that I would give to myself as well, is that don't be disheartened by people that always make it in kind of magazines and headlines on social media, and you know their work, and you know that it's not as meaningful as it should be. Lead by example, regardless of how young you are. Always lead with compassion and empathy. Always think back to your roots. Your experience is your experience. No one's going to take that away from you. No matter what anyone says about, oh, you're from one country, so you represent one country, or you're from one place, so you have to speak to that community only. No. You can be whatever you want to be, wherever you want to be, whoever you want to represent. That it's always going to be your story. Your story is unique, and you don't have to match anyone. But you'll always find support. You'll always find support through that journey of trying to figure that out. I try to figure that out now. So yeah, don't shy away from the journey. It's a journey, and you have to cross it, and you have to take in all the emotions, and you have to experience it all to actually make change and to actually make a difference. Again, that's very cliche. I'm really sorry.
No, not at all. Yeah.
But yeah, that's my experience, and that's the thing I would say.
Yeah, no, that wasn't cliche. I mean, if like we're using cliche in a negative way, I think that was really great. And I want to thank you so much for being here today to tell your story and share your journey. You really are definitely, I think, leading the way by example, and like super inspirational to me. And I'm sure anyone who comes to listen to this. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me.